Greetings to you, ladies and gentlemen in Radio Land, wherever you are. We wish you a pleasant compliments of the season, and we hope that everything will go well for you and your families, as we go through the season, the Christmas and New Year season. Also, at this time, we will continue our storytelling because this is one way we can effectively educate and entertain our audience. And we hope that you will enjoy this story. Welcome once again to Dati Civic and Peace Education and Audiovisual Series, episode 15, The Frogs and Black Snake in Frogsville. And the theme is, in unity, there is strength. In episode 14, we narrated and discussed the story about Dabuswa and the animals in Saniwen. We learned some lessons regarding what happens when your neighbor is in danger, but you turn a blind eye to your neighbor's plight. In that story, some animals, sheep, goat, cow, chicken, duck, refused to help rescue Dabuswa when her hut was on fire. However, two animals, dog and cat, played the role of good Samaritans during the fatal fire that took away Dabuswa's life. Dog and cat did their utmost best to save Dabuswa's life, but goat, sheep, chicken, cow, dog blatantly refused to heed the animal's 911 call. In the end, goat, sheep, chicken, dog, and cow were killed to entertain thousands of guests who attended Dabuswa's funeral and burial ceremonies. Had they cooperated with dog and cat, their lives would have been spared. However, wherever those animals are today, they are regretting and saying to themselves, if we had known, but it is too late now. That is spilled milk. Today, I would like to take you to another animal village called Frogsville. As the name suggests, Frogsville was a very small village the frogs built in the tropical rainforests of Liberia. According to the old folks, Frogsville was located way behind God's back. It was built on a hilltop overlooking Dububun, the traditional Crown name for what is now known as the Kavala River. Dububun was renamed Kavala by Portuguese explorers when European traders and explorers began to trade and conduct research with indigenous Africans in the early 15th century. Today, the Dububun forms the eastern political boundary between neighboring La Côte d'Ivoire and Liberia, along the Grand Jide River G and Maryland eastern frontiers of the Liberian-Ivorian border. In Frogsville, there were three distinct sets of inhabitants, namely toad frogs, bullfrogs, and spring frogs. Though their names, shapes, and colors varied, but they had one common denominator. They were all frogs living in Frogsville. They shared a common hegemony as members of the frog kingdom. From the beginning of the universe, the frogs lived together in peace and harmony as a cohesive frog family. They brushed their farms together, shared whatever they had with one another, and they obeyed the precepts of their ancestors. Back in the day, each animal family had their own kingdom, and they had a monarchical form of government. Also, since the beginning of their existence, a representative from each set of frogs has had the opportunity to serve as king in Frogsville based on a rotational leadership model. So one time, a toad will become king, And after that, then a bullfrog will become king, and then a spring frog will become king. So they did it on a rotational basis. Well, that was long before lion imposed himself as king of the jungle, and before he ordered that the governance structure and system of all animals be changed to a quote unquote democratic and republican form of government. Even in his lion kingdom, they did not practice democracy and republican government structure. So why impose something on the people when you yourself do not live or preach democracy? Lion adopted that foreign system when he paid a state visit to no man's land 2 years ago. And now he strives to make the land of every animal in the bush a no-fly zone. Accordingly, Lion decreed from his palace in the jungle that the leaders of any animal republic shall no longer be handpicked by the council of elders. Instead, the animals will elect their leaders, something that all the animals found to be very strange and not culturally relevant for them. For instance, since the frogs inherited a monarchical government system from their ancestors, until quite recently when Lion introduced democracy, they did not know how to live in a society that was governed by the principles of democracy and republican government structure. For an example, the frogs in Frogsville never voted before in their entire lives. They never engaged in electing a leader for a limited time to rule them. Instead, the frogs selected their leaders based on the process of adscription and not by achievements. These are two ways in which people gain status in society, either by ascription or by achievement. Ascription meaning that you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth, a silver spoon, a silver platter. Your family was already there, up there, and you were born, and so you became well known and rich or influential in society because you inherited it. Whereas other people gain their status by working hard through achievement. So these are two things. So before then, the frogs, any frog could become a king based on the fact that they were descendants of frogs. But now they must campaign, they must elect their leaders, which was a different, governmental system that was introduced to them by Lion, who became king of the jungles. Also, when selected, they ruled and died in office. Additionally, the frogs were used to addressing their leaders as Your Royal Highness, but not as His Excellency or Mr. President. Therefore, there were a lot of political lessons and practices, to be learned. Apart from the presidency, Lion's mandate also stipulated that there will be 2 additional assemblies, one assembly to pass laws and another assembly to interpret the laws and pass judgments. This new governance system was very different from the way the frogs had been governed from the beginning of time. Therefore, they did not have any clue about what a democratic or republican form of government structure was. Worst of all, they were never provided civic education like the way we are doing now, for Liberians. That wasn't done before. And in the beginning, when democracy was and republican form of government was introduced, the citizens were not educated on how the process works. And so up to today's day, people still don't understand how the process work because most of the Liberian people were born in a society where there were kings, not presidents. And so we have a lot of work to do to educate people. So it's the same thing. So therefore, the frogs did not have any clue about what a democratic and or republican form of government structure was. Worst of all, They were never provided civic education to help them learn about the government structure and how to motivate vast majority of frogs to actively participate and adopt the new political and social system that lion imposed on frogs. For that reason, the frogs initially protested due to a couple of reasons. One, prior to the introduction of this new political system in animal land, all animals lived in their separate kingdoms, and they made, interpreted, and executed laws based on each animal's unique history and culture. As a result, there was peace and uniformity among the animals. For instance, leopards' laws had no jurisdiction over elephants' laws, and vice versa. Each animal family remained a separate nation. So you had dog nation, frogs nation, pig nation, like that. However, when lion became king of the jungle, he changed the ground rules. But no animal dared to question his authority, or lion will do their business. Like Bruin Man says, when they say they will do your business, that means they're coming for you. Two, lion mandated that in these modern days, any animal can live in any part of the jungle except in Lion Kingdom. That was restricted to only lions as subjects. This law posed a security threat to the frogs because there are other animals like black snake that prey on them. In contrast, only the lions had a kingdom where the subjects were safe, but the rest of the other animals were forced to live under jungle justice laws. In particular, the residency clause in the Constitution of Animal Land made it legal for any animal to reside in any of the animal republics, even if they were incompatible, like the way black snake and frogs don't get along. But under lion's regime, black snake had all the rights and privileges to dwell wherever he wanted to live. Therefore, it was not surprising when he moved from Snake Burrow and chose Frogsville as his new home. Something coming to happen, but my mouth is too heavy to explain it with my zipper mouth or exactly point. Anyway, message not be Kenya, the old folks say. In fact, I was instructed by the old folks to deliver this message to all of you who are listening to my voice. So please hear him out as I narrate the story about the frogs and black snake in Frogsville. So, as I was saying, black snake moved in Frogsville on a cool Thursday evening, just when the sun had set in the west and darkness was beginning to fall upon Frogsville. Black snake was a mover, a con man. He knew how to make strategic moves for clandestine reasons. One, he moved when it was getting dark because he did not want his innermost intent to be revealed to the frogs. And you know what that intent is. Two, black snake's rationale for moving during darkness was because he felt if less frogs knew he had moved in the village, it would serve his clandestine purpose of sneaking in the homes of frogs when it was pitch dark to drag some frogs, grab some frogs for his breakfast, lunch, and dinner the following day. Nonetheless, as you may agree with me, everywhere you go, you will find kutukus. Despite the fact Black Snake and his family disguised themselves, yet some busybody frogs that were on their hustle observed and reported them to the chief of CIT in Frogsville. And when the word got around, Frogsville authorities notified all residents of Frogsville about Black Snake's presence in Frogsville and cautioned all frogs to stay indoors from dusk to dawn until they could discuss how to best handle the presence of Black Snake in Frogsville. Unfortunately for the frogs, Black Snake's relocation from Snake Burrow to Frogsville Republic happened when the former king of Frogsville named Old Grandfather Toad was seriously sick and was at the point of death. Yeah. Old grandfather Toad was the last king of Frogsville because before it was declared a republic under Lion's regime. Before his illness, he had ruled Frogsville for 180 years. He kept the frogs unified, and Frogsville became one of the best places to live under the sun. However, during old grandfather Toad's prolonged illness for the past 50 years, the close bond that existed between toad, bull, and spring frogs disintegrated for two reasons. One, since the governance structure had been radically changed by King Lion, old grandfather Toad's son could no longer succeed his father based on ascription. His son could never or no longer become king because he was king. Consequently, there was a leadership void. Also, under the new laws, the frogs must hold presidential and general elections and vote to elect their leaders instead of hand-picking them. Under the new law, leaders in animal land must obtain their status through achievement and not by ascription. To simplify what I mean by ascription, there are two ways in which an individual may obtain status in society. One, through achievement, meaning one must labor to achieve what he acquires in life. And two, one may also obtain status in society because one's parents were people of status and they passed or ascribed that privilege to their children. Two, according to Lion's mandate, any animal can live anywhere in animal land except in Lion's kingdom. In this case, the frogs are in the majority in Frogsville. They could remain in leadership if they remained united. The old Frogsville was for frogs. There were other animals that lived in Frogsville, but the frogs were in the majority. And since we're talking about majority rule and talking about democracy, then it meant that frogs stood a good chance. The frogs stood a good chance if they were united to win any election that would be held in Frogsville. But unfortunately, over the long period of time when the leader was ill, the frogs gradually became disunited. Something's going to happen. They no longer respected one another, neither did they observe the customs of their ancestors. Confused by the infusion of a foreign governance system, the frogs became outlaws. And when people become outlawed, anything goes. They can drive on the left-hand side when they're supposed to be driving on the right-hand side. Somebody come and grab you and slap in your ear, no question asked. Those kinds of things. That's what we mean by outlaw. For instance, the frogs no longer regarded one another as members of the same family of animals. They began to segregate among themselves. Toad frogs insulted spring frogs and called them good-for-nothing creatures. Spring frogs also told bullfrogs they were the ugliest creatures in the frog family. And spring frogs told toad frogs their eyes were too frightful to live in Frogsville, so they were just fussing among themselves. For this reason, Frogsville was no longer the peaceful, calm, and unified village it once was when old grandfather Toad was king, and when the frogs observed the traditions and the precepts of their forefathers and foremothers. So they put all those beliefs and things that were passed down to them from their ancestors. They said, well, to hell with it. We don't care. We're living in our own world now. Notwithstanding, there will always emerge a one-eyed man or creature in the land of the blind who may have foresight to forewarn the rest of his colleagues about what is to come. In Frogsville, Toad, the wise one, son of old grandfather Toad, was that wise creature. He was exceptionally gifted, and indeed the one-eyed man in the land of the blind. He was a picture-perfect image of his old sick father. Toad was what we call a chip of the old block, or as our folks say, a fruit does not fall far from the tree that bears it. For an example, Toad, the wise one, seriously decided to consult with all frogs in Frogsville regarding the threat black snake's presence posed to their safety, well-being, and permanency in Frogsville. Nonetheless, he could not say it out publicly for two reasons. Because one, opposing or denying any animal residency in any animal republic would be a violation of Article 7A, Section B of the Constitution of Animal Land. Therefore, Toad, the wise one, instead planned a secret meeting as opposed to a press conference to address the security dilemma that confronted them. Two, since it was a secret meeting, the invite would only be confined to male frogs. This was because traditionally, only male frogs are privy to attend secret meetings in which top intelligence and security matters and the preservation of Frogsville are discussed. Accordingly, all male frogs were summoned to meet on a spring frost palm wine tree with immediate effect at 7 a.m. Frogsville Standard Time. In addition, it was a customary belief of frogs that nothing discussed under the palm wine tree must be disclosed in public. And there will be serious consequences if any male frog disclosed the top secrets of Frogsville. Hence, frogs that fall in this category that will betray the trust of the frogs will be drastically dealt with by the Ghana force of Frogsville. Early before the break of day, Spring Frog sprang from his straw mattress and bamboo bed while the rest of his family was sound asleep. He grabbed a piece of charcoal from the fire hearth and brushed his teeth. Those days, people used to brush their teeth with charcoal, not toothbrush and paste and toothpaste, but charcoal. You put the charcoal there, you brush your teeth, and used to make the teeth white. Then he took the cup and dipped a cup full of water from a calabash to wash his face and rinse his mouth. After that, Spring Frog took his man cutlass and sharpened it on the rock that lay bare in front of that lay bare in the back of his hut until it was as sharp as a razor blade. Then he took the empty palm wine gourd from the dryer where it was stored and cleaned it so he could put fresh palm wine in it for his guests. As he traveled along the pathway to the waterside and to his palm wine tree, his legs brushed past a shrub of wet grass that had a bit of dew water on them. He whistled his favorite tune as he walked towards his palm wine tree while thinking of what to tell his fellow frogs to convince them to reunite so their heritage might not be, their heritage may be secured under adverse circumstances. Just then, his concentration was distracted when he heard footsteps behind him. And when he turned around, it was Bullfrog. "Good morning, brother," Bullfrog said to Spring Frog. "The same to you, brother," Spring Frog replied. No sooner had they greeted each other than Toad Frog arrived. The spirits of the frogs were high, and for a split second, it seemed the frogs would broker a deal. However, the old folks say, time will tell. Spring Frog sprang up his palm wine tree, and before you said jackrabbit, he came down from the palm wine tree with a gourd full of fresh palm wine. He first poured some palm wine in his own cup and said, "I'm taking out the witch," before he gobbled the cold palm wine down his throat. As he drank the wine, one could see Springford's Adam's apple moving back and forth. The other frogs laughed their hearts out when Springford said he was taking out the witch from the wine because before others can taste it for safety reasons. Man, Springford, your witch can't harm anybody here, man. Bullfrog jokingly responded, and they all burst out laughing. In a few minutes, about 40 male frogs assembled under Springfrog's palm wine tree, and after each frog had had a taste of Springfrog's fresh palm wine, then Springfrog got up, cleared his throat, and addressed his colleagues. My dear brothers, I called you here today because our lives are in danger. Things are not the way they used to be since Lion took over as king of the jungle. Also, our lives are no longer safe because Black Snake, who preys on us frogs, has become an official resident of Frogsville due to the new constitution of Animal Land. Though we immediately, imposed a dusk to dawn curfew, yet the number of Amber Alerts has increased drastically because our children are getting missing every day, but there is no one to investigate Black Snake as a prime suspect because of his status and connection to King Lion. Also, our leader told the wise one is now at the point of death, and so he can no longer muster up the strength to rule us again and to unite us. That is so sad, Bullfrog said interruptingly. Springfrog continued, yes, I agree. Also, do not forget the new law requires that we elect instead of selecting our new leader. Further, remember also that in a democracy, the majority wins. Therefore, when it comes to majority rule, we frogs stand a very good chance to win elections if we stop putting one another down and or stop segregating among ourselves. Therefore, my recommendation to all of you is that we must speak with one voice and select one frog to vie for the presidency of Frogsville. This may guarantee our victory because we are in the majority. However, if we do not back one candidate, we will lose, and Black Snake may emerge victorious in the forthcoming elections in Frogsville. One final word, if we fail to unite, we are doomed. But then, who should we choose? Bullfrog inquired. Springfrog replied, I don't know. It depends on who the majority favors. I recommend we nominate one of us because if we don't put our act together, Black Snake will rally all the snakes from Snakesville to vote for him. I agree with you, Springfrog, Bullfrog put in. To back your point, I would like to nominate you, Springfrog, as our presidential candidate. What? Upon my dead body, Frog or Toad Frog angrily interrupted. If I cannot be nominated as the first presidential candidate, then no frog will be. Hayaka. Look at that other trouble again. Confusion started. Toad Frog's disorderly behavior upset Bullfrog. This is the same mess that got all of us living in fear today because of selfishness. Toad Frog, you have been one of those undermining our interest in Frogsville since Black Snake moved in Frogsville, and this must stop. Oh, that is? If you feel I'm betraying the interest of frogs in Frogsville, then take me to George Jarla's court. In fact, I'm going to tell Black Snake you guys are planning to kill him and his family. After his statement, Toad Frog walked out of the meeting, even though his colleagues urged him not to leave the meeting until the differences were ironed out. The meeting on the spring frost palm wine tree did not end well. The frogs failed to reach a successful conclusion or compromise regarding what steps they must take to protect their interests as frogs in their own town. Now that Two Frog had threatened to inform Black Snake what transpired in the frog's secret meeting, coupled with the fact that the frogs were at loggerheads with one another, this was the straw that would break the camel's back. Indeed, it was a sign that dark clouds were hanging over Frogsville. This is the kind of bad omen that haunts a people when they keep grudge and harbor hatred against one another. True to his word, Two Frog went marching right into Black Snake's compound to tell on his fellow frogs. Chechepole. Two Frog became the Chechepole now of the frogs. He informed Black Snake the lives of Black Snake's wife and his children, and Black Snake's life were in danger. And so Black Snake assigned some of his special Black Beret forces to provide 24-hour protection for Two Frog and his household. Suddenly, Two Frog and his family became the untouchables of Frogsville. If you mistakenly said Two Frog, the special or Black Beret forces will summarily arrest you. Above all, you had better not be a frog, or else the consequences were more severe. Word about Two Frog's betrayal and defection spread like wildfire in Animal Land. It was said King Lion was very upset when he heard the frogs failed to form a union to contest in the forthcoming elections against Black Snake. Such silly creatures, Lion murmured as he ground his teeth in despair. Can those silly frogs see the writings on the walls? Don't they have ears, eyes to see, and ears to hear? And as for Mr. Silly Old Two Frog and his generation, it won't be too long before Black Snake starts eating them. Why are you so concerned about the plight of the frogs in Frogsville when you approve the laws that grant Black Snake free passage to live in Frogsville against the will of the frogs and the laws that were legislated by our forefathers? Why this double standard? King Lion's wife asked him. Oh man, Lion became furious. He became desperate. His long whiskers curled inward and his roar sounded like the thunders in the heaven. Wow, wow. How dare you question my integrity? Go in your chambers and do not come out for the next 20 days, Lion commanded his wife. Obediently, the lioness went into her chambers and her maids followed her. They too were perturbed, but they dared not utter a word or it will cost them their lives. Back in Frogsville, things were not looking good for the frogs. Old Grandfather Toad gave up the ghost about 15 minutes ago, and so the entire Frogsville was on lockdown. Every frog was ordered to stay indoors for 2 weeks until the burial of the Great One was over. As a former king, Old Grandfather Toad had a funeral befitting a king. All the animals in Animal Land, headed by King Lion, were present in Frogsville to pay their last respects to His Royal Highness. As the frogs processed to the gravesite to lay Old Grandfather Toad in his eternal place of rest, Black Snake and the two frogs were very, very busy campaigning and transporting duck, chicken, pig, goat, sheep, and cow to Frogsville to register them to vote for Black Snake. After the burial An election commission was set up, and guess who the commissioners were? They say goat burn, then you ask if goat's beer got burned too. Well, a blacksmith's son named Junior Boy was head commissioner, and the rest of the commissioners were all Toad Frog's sons. Even though the election was held in Frogsville, it seemed the election was held in a different land because there were more non-frog voters than there were frogs voting to elect their president. Such is the circumstance when a race has no clue of who they are. I hope Liberians learn from the story of the frogs in Frogsville. On election day in Frogsville, all shapes, sizes, and forms of frogs assembled to cast the vote. Most of them had defected and joined Blacksnake's camp. They waved banners of Blacksnake being carried on the shoulders of frogs. At one point, some frogs from Blacksnake's camp threw sticks and stones at their own frog brothers and sisters. Can you imagine that? The frogs that were attacked did not retaliate because they feared Blacksnake would instruct the Black Beret forces to brutalize them if they attempted to defend themselves. At the end of the election day, Blacksnake won by a very wide margin because most of the frogs, instead of voting for frogs, supported Blacksnake. And some of the frogs were forced to vote for Blacksnake or they would lose their lives. Sadly, for the rest of the frogs, they realized that a house divided within itself cannot stand. In addition, it was the dumbest thing the frogs ever did to themselves, to elect their arch enemy to be the first president of Frogsville. Well, as you and I know, after a democratic victory, there must be an inauguration. An inauguration there was big time. To tell you the truth, the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II cannot be compared to Blacksnake's inauguration. The pomp and pageantry were superb. For an example, musicians flew with angelic wings from the sky, and there were floats, acrobats, dancers, musicians, and artists from all walks of life. Millions of people from around the world came to watch Blacksnake ascend to the presidency of Frogsville, though Frogsville was the home of the frogs. Among the distinguished guests were King Lion, Queen Lioness, and Billy and Mrs. Nanny Goat. By then, Toad Frog was now ambassador plenipotentiary of the Republic of Frogsville to Billy and Nanny Goat Republic. By 10 a.m. Frogsville Standard Time, all distinguished guests were seated before the candidate-elect Blacksnake and his wife appeared. The president-elect wore the latest fashion on earth, a long black tail coat as black as charcoal, and his wife wore one of the most expensive ceremonial gowns that matched her husband's outfit. They both also wore gold slippers, gold chains, and some splendid jewelries they received as presents from Billy and Nanny Goats. The presidential motorcade included a limousine that was shaped like a ship. And guess what? Toad Frog and his family were part of the presidential entourage. I say, come see hypocrisy to its fullest. Blacksnake gave the Toads their flowers while they were alive. But in his heart, Blacksnake had determined it would be the last public appearance the Toads were making. Silence reigned in the hall when the program started. You could hear a pin when dropped on the floor. After Blacksnake was sworn in by one of his sons, who was Chief Justice of Frogsville, Blacksnake went to the podium to deliver his inaugural address that was broadcast throughout the entire universe. At first, Black Snake shared some jokes with the audience, and his jokes were mostly about how fat and greasy the frogs of Frogsville were. He loved them greasy frogs. He joked that his new regime would establish a gymnasium where frogs could go to exercise to lose weight, for the new Frogsville needed healthy frogs to rebuild their country. Some of the sensitive frogs, like spring frog and bullfrog, did not take Black Snake's jokes lightly. But since they were being closely watched by the Black Beret forces, they all put up fake smiles as if Black Snake's jokes were funny, but they weren't funny to them. Anyway, as Black Snake delivered his speech, he signaled the Black Beret forces to lock all the entrances and exits to the pavilion where the inaugural ceremonies were being held. When Spring Frog and Bullfrog noticed what was taking place, they whispered to one another to escape and then pretended they were going to use the restroom. While some of the frogs were struggling to escape through the bathroom windows, hell broke loose in the hall. In the presence of millions of guests, including those watching the television broadcast, Black Snake struck once, and to the surprise of everyone, an entire row of frogs disappeared in thin air. Ow. Monkey was first to observe the strange activities that happened. And then he said, I knew this was coming. A leopard never changes its spot. Look what those silly frogs have done to themselves. How can you give your enemy power to destroy you? They will learn the hard way, Monkey said. Just in that time, Black Snake struck again, and almost half of the audience that were frogs were now in his big gut. When the rest of the frogs saw what was taking place, they all said, feet, help our bodies. And they ran for their lives. This made Black Snake more furious. He said, oh no, you guys are now my citizens. You knew who I was, but you elected me anyhow. Therefore, I must have you frogs for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because as president of Frogsville, I can do whatever I want. In the chaos that ensued, some of the frogs made their way out of the hall, but Black Snake instructed his Black Beret forces to chase the hell out of the frogs until doomsday. In the end, some frogs ran into the swamp where Black Snake could not easily capture them. So Black Snake instructed his Black Beret forces to stand guard on shore. He told them, stay here and watch the frogs. They are not to come on shore or they will be eaten, because Frogsville is no longer theirs. This land is now ours, even though it is called Frogsville, but it will be forever ruled by Black Snakes. This is the reason frogs live in swampy areas, because they are still running away from Black Snake to this very day. At night, you would hear the crickets in the swamp fussing with the frogs, telling them, you stupid frogs refuse to iron your differences, but you preferred Black Snake, your arch enemy, to rule you. Now you have no place to live, and you have come in our swamp land to overcrowd our land. And so, folks in Radio Land, this brings us to the end of our story, the frogs and Black Snake in Frogsville. To conclude, what lesson did you learn from this story? And how relevant is this story to actual life in Liberia? Are there any similarities between frogs and Liberians? In what respect? I will appear live in the next episode for us to chat. Have a blessed week. And thank you for listening. Once again, this is Dr. Joseph Tomongalo de Baba, Executive Director and founder of Decade Artist Theater, saying thank you so much for listening. And we'll also thank all of our audience members, our donors. We thank the radio broadcasters who relay our programs in Liberia, Daniel Buell of Radio Advent, Father Tasia from Radio Paraclete in Banga, and Dio, Brian Dio of Radio Phoenix in Maryland. We say thank you so much for your cooperation, and also thanks to Rashford Gardner, the station manager of Radio Phoenix in Maryland, for his support. We thank all of you and look forward to hearing from you next week. Bye-bye for now.